everybody. My name is Samantha Carey, and I'm your current New York Chapter American Fisheries Society President. I wanted to officially welcome you all to the 2024 chapter of the American Fisheries Society meeting. I'm very excited to have you all here, and I'm excited to be back at the OTESAGA for the third time. Fun fact, this would have been our fourth, but COVID had us go online that year. We do have 285 people here with us today, and I'd like to first recognize the New York Chapter Executive Committee, and if you could please stand when I say your name, that would be great. Newsletter, Scott George. Website, Chris Castiglione. Student Subunit Leader, Susan Cushman. Professional Incentives, Heidi O'Riordan. Native Fishes, Scott Schluter. Youth and Education, Tom Hughes. Workshop, Florian Rada. Communications, Jillian Rivera. Membership, Dimitri Vigorsky. Nominating, Joe Casone. Audit and Finance, Frank Flack. Diversity, Stacy Frugal. Resolutions and Environmental Concerns, Randy Voss. President, Samantha Carey. Arrangements and Program Chair, Julie Priolo and Alec Malucky. And then President-elect and Raffle, Jessica Best. So again, I would like to thank those who are AFS members, and our committee chair, Dimitri, put a red star on name tag, so if you see a red star on here, that means you're an American Fisheries Society member. Absolutely important to do. And the American Fisheries Society has been a huge part of my life for over 10 years. I've been fortunate to have been traveled to places such as Quebec City, Reno, Nevada, Portland, Oregon, Lake Placid, New York, along with others to attend parent and local chapter meetings. At this point in my career, I'm not quite sure what I would have done without the American Fisheries Society and the fantastic opportunities it's provided me, and I'm hoping you all feel the same. We do have one vacancy on our New York Executive Committee, and if you or anyone you know might be interested in serving as a Native American Affairs, please let me or anyone on XCOM know. This year's theme is Fisheries Management in an Ever-Changing Environment, from Inlands to Oceans, and we have 4 invited speakers here today who will show us how important it is to stay on top and involved on environmental and regulatory changes that are occurring and that will continue to occur. I wanted to touch on some of the housekeeping items for the day. Emergency exits are located in the back, and in the event of emergency, please head out into the front of the hotel. Coffee breaks will be served at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., and lunch will be served at the conclusion of the plenary across the hotel in the Glimmer Glass and Fenimore rooms. Concurrent sessions will begin at 1 and go until 4 p.m. this afternoon. There will be a New York Chapter business meeting in this room from 4 to 5 p.m. today, and there's a door prize raffle for those of you that do attend, so you walk in and we'll get a raffle ticket. Please note that you don't have to be a member of New York XCOM to attend these meetings, and we'd love to hear input from everybody in the room. The poster session will be from 5 to 6:30, and then the banquet will begin soon after. Please remember to bring money to support our student raffle, to support our travel awards to students who come to these meetings. We have a bunch of high dollar items such as kayaks, fly rods, and the rest you'll have to see. If you did sign up to judge presentations or posters, please see Susan Cushman. I believe she might be in here. If not, you can see her right before the concurrence session start at 1 o'clock today. We are also taking nominations for President-elect. So if you or anyone you know might be interested in serving as President for the New York Chapter, please see me or anyone on the Executive Committee. And with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Dr. Margaret Murphy from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Margaret received a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Siena College and a Master's and PhD in Fisheries and Aquatic Ecology from SUNY ESF. Margaret is currently a Fisheries Program Manager for the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, where she is chair of the Lake Champlain Cooperative Fisheries Technical Committee and oversees much of the department work in Lake Champlain. She also works on statewide flow and fish passage projects related to fisheries concerns. Prior to state work, Margaret was in environmental consulting, working for several large firms, and actually ran her own business in the Adirondacks for 4 years. Margaret has been a member of AFS for 34 years and has held so many leadership positions and chaired several committees, and is currently serving as second VP of AFS. Please give a warm welcome to Margaret, talking about the history of lake trout management in Lake Champlain and changes following recent wild recruitment.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is exciting. Before I dive into my presentation, I would like to provide everybody a welcome from AFS. I am serving as second vice president, as Sam mentioned, and we are trying to get around to the various chapter meetings as officers so that we can engage better with the membership, all of you. We're trying to do this on a 3-year cycle. This was an easy one for me because I like to come to this meeting anyway. But AFS, for those that don't have the red star, I will shame you into it. I will break you down. Where's Frank Flack? Frank, you are now a full member, correct?
How come I didn't get a star?
Frank has his red star, so if Frank can get a red star, all of you can get a red star. Seriously, membership is down in AFS. Without AFS, we will not have journals. We will not have books. We will not have meetings. You will not host this meeting without AFS. They support a lot of the resources that this meeting needs, including insurance, which is expensive. So if you are not familiar with AFS, there are some strategically located flyers scattered around the room. There's some stuff in the registration room as well. Please sign up. The membership categories are in tiers, so you work your way up to a full cost membership, students, and then early career professionals, and then professionals. So it's a great way to be involved and support AFS, and AFS can then support the great work that the New York chapter does. All right, so Ellen Marsden asked if anybody knows Cowboy. There's a story. Ask me over a beer sometime. I will tell you about Cowboy. He's become a great educational tool for me, so he does show up occasionally in pictures. Let's start my stopwatch. All right, so first I do want to recognize my co-authors. Bernie Pienka with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, Dr. Ellen Marsden with UVM at the Rubenstein Lab, and Nicole Bach with the New York State DEC, the Lake Champlain Fisheries biologist. Sorry, I got a pop-up here I got to get rid of. All right, that's better. Also, I'm going to get the acknowledgements done right up front. This is a huge effort. This has been going on for over 30 years. So I do want to recognize that large collaborative effort. Many, many people contributing. I'm sure this list is not exhaustive. It was what I could come up quick asking everybody around, like, who else has been involved in this? It has been an ongoing effort, and I do appreciate the collaborations of all of our partners. And I also want to thank Senator Patrick Leahy, now retired, who has supported all the Lake Champlain work with financial investments in our programs. We hope that continues with our new senator. I'm going to start out orienting everyone to Lake Champlain. For those that aren't familiar, hopefully you are, it does border this state. It's located on the borders of New York and Vermont and a little bit in Quebec. It does flow out through the Richelieu River in Quebec. It's 193 kilometers long, 20 kilometers wide at the widest point, with a mean depth of 20 meters, a maximum depth of 120 meters, and it's about 1,100 square kilometers in size, almost a Great Lake. The lake can be broken up into 5 different lakes, so starting south to north. The South Lake is more riverine-like. At the southern end, where the Pulteney River inlets and the Barge Canal also connects the Hudson River to Champlain, down that end of the lake. We have the main lake, which is a larger portion, kind of the left side there you can see. And then over towards the right side, the Missisquoi Bay, the Inland Sea, or the Northeast Arm. There's a couple names there that get thrown about. And then Missisquoi Bay, that shallow bay up at the north end of the lake. There's also 8 major rivers, the Missisquoi, Lamoille, and Winooski rivers, and Otter Creek in Vermont, and the Great Chazy, the Saranac, the Ausable, and Boquete rivers in New York. So a bit of background on Lake Champlain. It did support an indigenous population of lake trout during the early settlement but they were rapidly depleted and development progressed during the 1800s, and they did disappear by 1900. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, New York and Vermont started stocking lake trout. In 1973, the Lake Champlain Fish and Wildlife Management Cooperative was formed among the New York State DEC, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with the major goal of developing and maintaining a salmoniid fishery. The early focus was on the fishery itself and not necessarily natural reproduction. A variety of strains were stocked initially, but stocking eventually became focused on the Seneca Lake strain and the Lake Champlain strain, which was brood stock from feral fish in Champlain that, can y'all guess it, came from the Seneca Lake strain. So it's kind of a mix of that Seneca Lake strain and a feral Lake Champlain strain. Stocking from the 70s to about 1995 averaged 171,000 yearlings annually with the goal of reestablishing that fishery. Experimental sea lamprey control started in 1990 since those management goals were not being reached and continued through 1997. Following evaluation of that program, a long-term sea lamprey control program started in 2002 and continues today. Stocking was reduced in 1995 to 82,000 yearlings annually due to the potentially higher survival with the sea lamprey control, as well as some concerns with the changing smelt population throughout the lake that were a major food source for lake trout. In the cooperative's 2010 strategic plan, in addition to maintaining a fishery, a sub-goal was added to increase numbers of naturally produced lake trout consistent with progress toward a self-sustaining population. So with that background, I'm going to highlight some of the efforts and studies that have gone on in the past 15 to 20 years regarding lake trout and the changes that have been documented over that time. We're going to first review the Lake Champlain Cooperative assessments at locations on the New York and Vermont sides of the lake, as well as some sea lamprey control efforts. We'll then review recent findings related to juvenile lake trout from studies conducted by the Marsden Lab at UVM. And then we're going to put all those pieces together and describe management actions that have been taken in the past few years. Lake trout spawning surveys have been conducted by the cooperative since the early 1990s at Whalen Bay and occasionally at Willsboro Bay and also at Hatchery Cove in Vermont. These surveys are done to assess size structure, lamprey wounding, and evidence of natural reproduction. All stocked fish are fin clipped using a 5-year rotation of clips so that they can be identified during these surveys. Hatchery Cove, as pictured here, is located on the west side of Grand Isle, adjacent to the Lake Champlain ferry dock. So that's the ferry that takes passengers from Grand Isle over to Plattsburgh. Hatchery Brook flows into the cove and is water that comes directly from the Edwy Fish Culture Station, which is seen at the top of this picture. Lake trout are sampled by overnight trap netting in this location. And you can note the break wall for the ferry at the bottom of the picture. Typically outside, along the outside of that break wall is where lake trout spawning occurs. Whalen Bay and Willsboro Bay, I don't have a good picture of that because they sample it at night. They didn't have any good pictures for me. They're both along the New York shoreline near Essex, New York. The nighttime boat electrofishing occurs each fall in these locations. Every year in Whalen Bay and Willsboro Bay as they can get to it. Looking at some of the recent data from the spawning surveys, this graphic provides a comparison of the spawning population size versus the relative frequency in 2018 and 2019 at Whalen Bay. The black bars showing females, the red bars showing males. There is some annual variability in size structure, as you can see from these plots, with a higher frequency of larger females at Whalen Bay in 2019 compared to 2018, although those mean total lengths really don't vary. Similarly, at Hatchery Cove, there is some annual variability to the size structure, with few larger fish in 2019 compared to 2018. You can also notice here the female catch in 2018 was more similar to the male sample, while in 2019, far fewer females were collected. Sampling can vary each year due to weather conditions, which can influence male to female ratios, but they generally provide a good overview of the spawning population. For those that want to experience fall in Vermont and the lake trout spawning survey, feel free to join us in early November. Winds can kick up, it can get a little rocky out there. As I mentioned, all stocked fish receive a fin clip on a 5-year rotation. I will note that that clipping can miss some fish, so the clipping error rate of about 5% is used. Through 2019, there was still a low percentage of unclipped fish among the spawning adults surveyed at both locations. Most can be attributed to that clipping error. While spawning surveys were indicating a good size structure for these adults, they were still dominated by stocked fish. Fish less than 660 millimeters, which corresponds to age 4 or 5, based on that fin clip, are used to evaluate the percentage of clipped to unclipped fish. Through 2019, the percentage unclipped was low, indicating limited wild reproduction, or at least limited recruitment to the spawning population. As I will describe, there was evidence of natural reproduction since 2012, but those fish were still not appearing in the spawning surveys, and we were not sure why, as that spawning age is typically around 6 to 7. And again, our surveys look at those 4 or 5-year-olds. The management cooperative had developed indicators in 2018 to identify metrics to be used to determine if a management action needs to be taken. One of these is assessment of the percent wild or unclipped lake trout to evaluate when stocking changes or harvest practices need to be implemented to maintain that balance of the predator and prey ratio. Again, lake trout are those long-lived salmonids, and the impacts of natural recruitment are unknown, so we didn't want to get that predator balance out of whack. The proportion of unclipped lake trout among those in the same sample size range, with fin clips corresponding to 4 or 5-year-olds, in the fall spawning surveys would be that metric. If that percentage was greater than or equal to 15%, the stocking should be reduced by 25%. If that percentage was greater than or equal to 25%, the stocking should be reduced to 50%. You can see through 2019 we were far from those goals. Another indicator we've been tracking are the sea lamprey wounding rates on lake trout. Tracking lamprey wounding provides a check on potential survival of lake trout, with early thoughts that wounding rates were so high that many lake trout were likely not surviving to reproduce, so stocking numbers were higher early on to account for that. As mentioned, an experimental sea lamprey control program was conducted from 1990 to 1997, and the wounding rates were down during that time period. The current program was implemented in 2002. So the sea lamprey wounding rate is assessed on lake trout sampled from those fall spawning assessments within a specific size range. The wounding rate has been variable, as you can see here, since 1990, and has not reached the objective of 25 wounds per 100 fish until that last bar there in 2022. We got below that to 23 wounds per 100 fish. Last fall, it went back up. So we were cheering for a bit, but it's not as high as it has been seen historically, but that rate has gone back up. So switching gears now to the juvenile surveys, what do we know about wild reproduction in lake trout? Sampling has been conducted by the Marston Lab at UVM since 2001, with spawning surveys, emergence traps, and bottom trawling searching for juveniles. In the early 2000s, they found evidence of reproduction with high egg density, as you can see on the left picture there, and fry emergence through their fry emergence sampling. You can see some of those fry in that jar. During intensive sampling in 2006 to 2007, there also was high fry capture at 2 of the 4 sites. However, 2- and 3-year-olds were not being seen from the wild population, as they were all fin clipped. We don't see, why weren't we seeing, or why wasn't Ellen seeing those 2- and 3-year-olds in these surveys? Fish are stocked as yearlings, so any 0- or 1-year-olds would likely be wild and not fin clipped. So is mortality during the first year limiting recruitment during that fry stage? This finding led to a lot more questions and more sampling for juveniles to assess what might be happening. So I'm gonna skip 10 years and jump into 2015. So after those initial studies, more intensive bottom trawling targeting 0 to 3-year-olds were conducted by the UVM lab at 3 different areas of the main lake. The North Main Lake, the Central Main Lake, the South Main Lake. Okay, again, that's all that big clump of Main Lake. It's not actually the South Lake. There's some confusion with some of the terminology at times. These efforts yielded much more success than prior attempts and did indicate successful recruitment of eggs late in 2012, as you can see here with the percent wild 1 to 3-year-olds as early as 2015 in those basins. The proportion of wild juveniles, this top graphic, compared to stock juveniles in ages 1 to 3 was highest in the Central Lake, so that red bar. However, the overall abundance of wild juveniles was highest in the South Lake, so that green bar, and especially on that bottom plot. And it was lowest in the North Lake. Catches tended to be higher in later summer and fall when the YOY started to recruit the trawling survey. Studies are ongoing to better understand spawning locations, which may have an impact on what we were seeing here. So be sure to catch Matt Fuchsia's talk this afternoon for an update on those surveys. Now, just looking at the Central Lake, the Central Main Lake, where the proportion of wild fish was highest. You can see that the proportion of juveniles increased from 2015 to 2018 with almost 90% wild in 2018. This was huge. I think Ellen was jumping up and down on the boat that day. It then declined a bit in 2019 and 20 and was back up again in 2021. As shown on the graphic, sampling in 2020 and 2021 were more limited with fewer numbers of trawls conducted. COVID put a hamper on all of our field studies. The percentage of wild juveniles has remained high even with lower sample sizes though. As of 2020, 8 wild year classes have been collected as juveniles, indicating reproduction is successful and fish are surviving past that first year. All right, so we know lake trout are reproducing in the lake. They're successfully recruiting past that first year since at least 2012. Why had we still not seen any recruitment to the spawning population through 2019? Recall our spawning indicator is for fish less than 660 millimeters long, corresponding to fin clips representing ages 4 and 5, but we weren't seeing any of those corresponding wild fish in that size class, or any larger fish for that matter, through 2019. Vermont Fish and Wildlife implemented sampling in the summer of 2020 to try to assess fish in the 4 to 6-year-old range that are not yet spawning to try to understand why we were not seeing more wild lake trout during spawning surveys. Were we not sampling the right locations? Were they not surviving past that age for some reason? We just weren't sure. So this age and size range was not being effectively sampled in either end, in the juvenile surveys or those spawning surveys, and could provide additional information on what might be happening to those wild fish. The target was to collect at least 100 lake trout from each of those 3 areas of the main lake, similar to the areas where juvenile sampling had occurred. Sampling included assessing for fin clips to identify wild versus stocked fish. We got a lot of information from these fish as well. So we got gut samples, we took maxillaries for aging, so we gained as much data from the fish as we could throughout that sampling. We did also continue those fall spawning assessments as well. So what did we find? We did find the targeted size ranges we were looking for and noted a higher percentage of unclipped fish. Okay, the red part of those bars are those unclipped, or what we call wild. The black is the clipped fish. More of these at the smaller sizes compared to larger sizes, indicating that they may just start to recruit to that spawning population. From 2021 through 2023, you can see the progression of those red bars as an increasing proportion of the total within the circle. I tried to circle like the 625 to 775. It's hard to read, it's hard to read those bottom numbers. The data indicate that wild fish making up a larger proportion of the lake trout sample, which is excellent news. So we should start seeing more wild fish in our spawning assessments. But it gave us some really good information to say, all right, these fish are growing, they're still out there. We're just missing them in those spawning populations, or maybe they're just going to start showing up now. So back to those fall spawning surveys. From 2011 to 2023 at all sites combined, you saw the top part of the table, the blue part outlined is the new part of the table. More of these of the smaller sizes are compared to larger sizes, indicating they might just start be recruiting. So by 2020, we were starting to see those changes. And you can see 2020, we had 10 to 14 to 26 to 27. So we were rapidly increasing those unclipped fish in our spawning surveys. So looking back at our indicator for reducing stocking, remember when we started to see 15% unclipped, we were going to reduce stocking by 25%. And then if we saw 25, we were going to reduce that by 50%. We neared that first indicator in 2022 and exceeded the second indicator for stocking reductions. We neared it in 2021 and exceeded the 25% in both 2022 and 2023. So we're going to get to the management decisions made, but I'm first going to put together all of our data collected so far, kind of how we put this all together. It's not quite as simple as all this looks. So this I talked about a lot. This is my favorite plot. This tells us a lot about what's going on out there and what we have and haven't been finding. So you can see percentages vary among the sampling methods and location. So I'm going to kind of break this apart for you a bit. We have the spawning surveys we conduct at Hatchery Cove. Those are the red bars. Whalen Bay in green and Willsboro Bay in yellow. Until 2019, the percentage unclipped was below 10% at all locations. The black bar represents the indicator we've been using for those spawning surveys. Note that Hatchery Cove, that red bar, is much lower than all the others through 2023 and seems to diverge from the rest in 2020. In 2020, the gill netting started and is now added to the graph as a blue bar. Our sampling location at Hatchery Cove seems to indicate that the Hatchery Cove fish are mostly of hatchery origin and may reflect homing behavior as the cove is in great spawning habitat, although as I mentioned, the outer side of that break wall is. While Whalen Bay and Willsboro Bay has a lot more wild unclipped fish. In addition, our gill netting also reflects the higher percentage of wild fish, really highlighting Hatchery Cove as that big outlier. So with all the additional data in hand, we relied on the percentage we identified in the indicators and made 2 management decisions in the past 4 years. With the increase observed in 2020, the Fisheries Technical Committee of the Management Cooperative recommended making a stocking change in accordance with the first indicator of a 25% reduction if that percent wild was greater than or equal to 15%. That first reduction took place in 2022 and ended up being a 33% reduction because New York actually needed to end their stocking due to some hatchery capacity issues, and that was the percentage that they contributed to the fish stocking. So it didn't exactly line up with that recommended 25%, but we felt comfortable that our numbers of wild fish were still increasing. In early 2023, the Fisheries Technical Committee recommended a second reduction to 50% of the original numbers, so that indicator was based on the original stocking numbers of 82,000. So we implemented a 50% reduction with the 2024 stocking based on the data collections from 2022, which equates to now 41,000 fish being stocked starting in 2024. So that happened last fall. Vermont stocks in the fall. We're actually doing a study to do fall spring because New York stocked in spring, which is a whole other rabbit hole I will not go down. It's still going to take us several years to evaluate these stocking changes, so we're hoping to not make any stocking changes immediately. This is a huge success story, to find natural reproduction, to find recruitment to that spawning population. And we've highlighted it to the public as such. A lot of anglers are like, wait, you're stocking fewer? But it's exciting to say no, because they're doing it on their own. We don't have to help them. I also want to point out that the overall catch is evaluated in the gillnet sampling, so we're trying to normalize this. We have a set number of gillnet sets. We're looking for 100 fish from each location, trying to really standardize it to get that CPUE. So the overall catches evaluated in the gillnet sampling isn't increasing with the increase in the no clip, but it does appear to be a replacement of clipped fish with the unclipped fish. So you see that black bar getting bigger over the last 4 years, but the main bar hasn't changed a lot. So we're really just seeing replacement and not an increase in overall catch per unit effort. So this means if we reduce stocking, we would expect continued replacement with more unclipped fish. We're going to continue to evaluate over the next several years, so stay tuned. So some more pretty colors. This one was somewhat hot off the press, but I do want to point out for the spring trawling that occurred last spring. So we were able to get out, get some limited trawling done to try to get an assessment of that juvenile population. We hadn't had a good assessment in a year or two. So just want to make sure we're still seeing reproduction happening. It appears to be, the plot here highlights a couple of things. The numbers of wild fish outnumbered numbers of stocked fish at all size classes. Note those different y-axes. The wild count goes up to 40 while the stocked goes up to 4, for those that might not see those numbers in the back of the room. The differences in size also between your wild and stocked fish. So wild age 1 is purple, age 2 is the green, and age 3 are the yellow. The wild age 1 and 2 are much smaller than those stocked fish at age 1 and 2. So those stocked fish are considerably larger for those first couple of years, but those yellow bars start showing that these wild fish start catching up a little bit. So what happened? Why did we, since 1972, we had not seen any natural recruitment of lake trout and Lake Champlain, and all of a sudden, we have a lot. That's the million-dollar question. Limiting factors identified in the Great Lakes don't seem to apply in Lake Champlain. So of course you look to the Great Lakes, what's happened there? The high fishing mortality of stocked lake trout we're not seeing. We're not seeing insufficient stocks of spawners. We don't really see a loss of spawning habitat. There's not a high adult mortality due to sea lamprey predation as far as we can see. And alewife interactions really don't seem to be the issue because alewife didn't appear in Lake Champlain until 2003, and they really took off about 2007. So maybe multiple things we're still evaluating, but check with Ellen. There's a paper hot off the press related to alewife invasion in Lake Champlain that may actually be benefiting